Hello Netrunner fans and welcome to my 2016 retrospective. In this first part, we're going to look at some major trends on the Corp side of the game. I'm going to give you my pick for the top 10 Corp cards of 2016, and at the end of the video, I'm going to give you my pick for the worst card on the Corp side of the game. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly go through what was released throughout the year. This was an interesting year because it was all data packs. We saw the entire Mumbad cycle, that was 6 packs, and then most of the Flashpoint cycle, there's 1 pack that's yet to be released. That comes out to $164.45 USD, and that's for the manufacturer's suggested retail price, or about $13.70 a month. My first major trend is the rise of the mass asset style. The Mumbad cycle had a bunch of assets that were much more powerful, higher trash cost, much more impactful effects than we had seen on assets prior to this, and some of the interactions between the assets made them very, very potent in combination. Industrial genomics is the quintessential ID of the mass asset strategy, and though we saw also Gagarin and nowadays controlling the message also very strongly in the mix, this deck was really challenged in the middle of the year with the Most Wanted list update. We saw the errata of Museum of History to be unique, as well as Mumba Temple being added to the Most Wanted list. Despite these changes, mass assets is here to stay. And we've even seen some cards towards the end of the year that have given the strategy a big boost. So I think this is going to continue to be a major archetype going into 2017. My second major trend of 2016 is a new role for tags. In the past, we've largely seen tags used as an enabler for Scorched Earth, and while that still sees quite a bit of play, we've seen a lot of new alternatives with tagging. Both new ways to tag the runner, new ways to keep them tagged, and especially new ways to punish the runner for being tagged. These combination of changes have really changed the role of tags in the game, I think, to be a lot more granular and more complex and varied. And we've also seen runners have to adapt to the fact that they're getting buried in tags. My last major trend is the death of Glacier. If you watch my reviews in 2014 and 15, a major thread was that Glacier had evolved and was a huge player in the metagame of both of those years. This year we've seen a lot less Glacier, and that's as we've seen new ways to tax the runner in the forms that I just discussed in the previous 2 trends, but we've also seen really potent effects on the runner side of the game to deal with some of the massive staples of Glacier decks. And we'll be talking about that a lot more on the runner side of this 2-part series. Now we're getting into the list, and I'd like to kick it off with an honorable mention. That's Sandberg from 23 Seconds. As I just mentioned, this is a pretty sad year for Glacier, so I wanted to make sure that we got a Glacier card on the list. And this thing has been a huge monster in adding on a bunch of strength, making it much more taxing to deal with your ice. It has a natural fit in RP since it's semi-protected there, but it's also been powerful in HB Glacier decks as well. I think this card, if we see a resurgence of Glacier, is going to be a really powerful component of that, and that's why it made my honorable mention list. Now we're on to the list proper. And my number 10 pick is Bioethics Association from Democracy and Dogma. While the political assets were all strong, this is easily the most notorious of all of them. It was the main way that the IG decks won the game, and it's also been pretty strong in PE styles, PU styles, other decks that are looking to do damage over time. This has some pretty great synergy with hostile infrastructure. If you're already looking to bleed the runner out with damage, you can put hostile infrastructure there and make it even trickier for them to trash this thing. And since they're probably going to have to draw cards at the beginning of their turn since they're getting pinged, that's going to make them have to use even more clicks if they go to trash your thing and then take more damage. My number 9 pick for Corp cards for the year is Jeeves Model Bioroids from Salsette Island. Even if this card wasn't good, it would definitely be in my mind as one of the coolest cards released all year, but it also happens to be a pretty monstrous design. I really like this because you can use it to score agendas, but you can also use it to just get a little extra oomph out of your effects. And this has been an interesting effect for HB Glacier, and the Alliance thing makes it so you can play it outside of that faction as well. I anticipate this to continue to see some play into 2017 as players come up with more and more cool things to do with this. Now we come to my number 8 pick for the year, and that's Consulting Visit from the Liberated Mind. Tutors are insanely powerful in pretty much every card game, and this is absolutely no exception. It not only lets you find the operation, but then you get to play it. That's been really strong with meat damage effects, and it's been especially really good in combination with some of the other cards that are on this list. I expect this to continue to be really good going into 2017, as both Wayland decks can use it to tutor up their various punishing effects, but also other decks can splash it because of the Alliance mechanic. My number 7 pick is Sensi Actors Union from Democracy and Dogma. NBN doesn't have a shortage of good ways to draw cards, but this is pretty easily one of the best ever printed, and in combination with controlling the message, this has been an absolute monster throughout the year. It's really hard as the runner to let this stay in play and fire, because every time it goes off, the Corp is getting a ton of value from it. So this is one of those obligatory must-trash kind of cards, and since it's cheap and easy to include in an NBN deck, it's just been really monstrous. Speak of the devil, my number 6 pick is NBN Controlling the Message from 23 Seconds. While there's certainly no shortage of good IDs in NBN, this one allows you to play that mass asset style I talked about really well. And you actually don't even need to play that many assets because this is so good at defending them. The Sensi's Actor Union, insanely good with this. You can also do some tricky stuff like running them into Mumbad Virtual Tour. Then they gotta trash it and take this tag. This thing has just been such a taxing monster. It has made it really hard to play a runner deck that is not able to both deal with tags and run and trash assets. Now we've come to my number 5 pick, and that's Hard Hitting News from 23 Seconds. This is the new hotness when it comes to tagging the runner, and in my view, this is a lot more interesting than pretty much all of the previous effects. The biggest thing about this is the terminal thing, which makes it so that you can't tag them and punish them for tags in the same turn. So if you hit them with the tags, the runner can just spend their next turn and ditch all of them. Now that's really expensive, and if you're using something like Sync, it's going to be even more expensive. And when you add in that not only have we seen more powerful tag punishment effects like the ones we're going to talk about pretty soon, but also things like Consulting Visit have given us a way to tutor this up as a one-of. Not to mention this is a 2-influence card versus Midseason Replacements, which was a 4-influence card. That's made this a much better option for non-NBN styles. Now we've come to my number 4 pick for the year, and that's Boom from Escalation. Right out of the pack, this card had a pretty serious impact on the metagame, and that might seem a little strange since Scorched Earth has been in the game since Core Set, but this has a lot of huge advantages over Scorched Earth. First of all, with breaking news, one of these is going to flatline a lot of runners. You're going to have a card in your deck to deal with either the tags or the meat damage. And on top of that, this is only a 3-influence card. So it makes it a lot more of a streamlined package outside of Wayland to play a kill deck. It's much easier in NBN to play 1 or 2 of this at 3-influence than it is to play a whole bunch of Scorched Earths. On top of that, there have been some diagnostics combos that have used this pretty well in combination with 24/7 and this. All around, there's just been a lot of ways to leverage this card. It's made you as a runner have to really think about, how am I going to deal with a bunch of meat damage? How am I going to avoid tags? And that's been a big trend throughout the year, but this thing has really pushed the tag punishment to a new level, and that 3 influence I think is easily the most critical aspect of the card. Now we come to my number 3 pick, and that's Friends in High Places from Martial Law. This just came out at the tail end of the year, and as such, it's been somewhat unproven, but this is going to be a major player in next year. Not only is this card super easy to use in basically any deck, it's 1 influence, and as long as you have stuff that dies, it's gonna do something relevant. But on top of that, it's really inexpensive. But the thing that really pushed it to the top, in my view, is its interaction with the mass asset decks that have defined this year. This is going to give you a way to get back 2 assets after your runner opponent trashed them. Maybe they had to pay extra because of IG. Maybe they had to take a tag because of controlling the message. This just gets them back. And this is also really good in HB with sexy bots. This is good if your ice dies. This is pretty much going to be good anytime you draw it other than like turn 1. And this is one of the best recursion cards we've seen on the Corp side for quite some time. Now we've come to my number 2 pick for 2016. And that's Exchange of Information from the Liberated Mind. This is easily one of the best tag punishment cards we've ever seen, and outside of Scorched Earth and Boom, this is really the king of tag punishment. This gives you a way to get a lot more value out of playing 5 for 3s, especially Global Food Initiative, where the runner's only going to get 2 and then you can swap it and get the full 3 points. It's also brought back some 5 for 3s with powerful effects like Restructured Data Pool, for example. This card is really a major design space influencer because it's going to make it difficult to make 5 for 3s when you think about how this might interact with them. And in some ways, I think that's okay because this card has been a lot more interesting than the sort of auto win stuff that we see out of other tag punishment. And really, it's only the combination with breaking news that I think has had players chafing on this card a bit. I strongly prefer this kind of tag punishment over the binary win sort of tag punishment of the past. This is a huge precedent setter when it comes to what is possible with tag punishment. This is going to dramatically influence the game, but it's not going to outright win the game. And there's a lot of cool combinations you can use with this that have got players thinking about how to use a lot of underutilized cards otherwise. Now we've come to my number 1 pick Corp card for 2016, and this is kind of a cheat, but I'm going to do it anyway. This is Mumbad City Hall, along with Museum of History and Mumba Temple. These cards are all really strong, and have seen a lot of play in the mass asset style as well as in some other styles. But the Mumbad City Hall was really the glue that held that oppressive deck all together. The big thing about this was its former interaction with Heritage Committee. It lets you essentially look at the top 3 of your deck over and over. That's since been errated. And the same thing was also true to some degree with Museum of History, which has also been errated. With Museum, you could reshuffle cards back in and then go tutor them up again with Mumbad City Hall. You could also get the museums in play as well as the Mumba temples to play for it, all with the Mumbad City Hall. There was a lot of focus on Museum of History as being the card that players had the most negative experience with. The fact that it just keeps reshuffling this stuff, you can eventually win with a card like Bioethics. That was pretty frustrating for a lot of players, and I think was pretty tedious and time-consuming to play out, even if you liked the strategy. But in my view, the core problem was this Mumbad City Hall that lets you assemble all of the stuff quickly. Museum of History has not really been much of a problem since it's been errated, and not being able to have two of them rezzed at a time really takes the power out of that card. Regardless of where you stand on the power level of the current mass asset decks, these cards have spurred a big discussion in the community about the role of recursion and the role of tutoring effects in the game. It's fair to say that this kind of deck was the biggest breakout and strongest new archetype of 2016, and that's why it had to be my #1 pick for the year. Before we go, we've got to do the worst Corp card of 2016, and there were certainly quite a few in the running here. My short list was pretty long, but in my view, there was pretty clearly a winner, and that was Red Tape from the Liberated Mind. I'd like to quickly go back and listen to a clip of my initial review of this card. For whatever reason, every 4 to 6 months, we have to prove that Chum is still a bad card by printing some ice like this that does nothing as the innermost piece, and I don't know what else to say. Well, since then, I've thought of a few other things to say. First of all, they can parasite the ice. Second of all, they can David the thing that got bigger. Third of all, it's just really not that great at 2 to res, 5 strength. I understand that ratio is pretty good, but it's 1 sub. You can still just break it if you have to. Man, this thing is not good. And I just don't think these positional kind of ice are ever going to be good enough unless they move around somehow or have some sort of effect that makes them do something relevant if they're the only piece of ice on a server. Well, that's going to do it for part 1 of my 2016 retrospective. I hope you enjoyed this part, and be sure to tune into part 2. We're going to look at all the runner cards over there. Lots of interesting stuff to talk about. There's been a lot of developments this year. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you over in part 2.